everyone. I wanted to welcome you to the newest installation of the Leo Beck Book Club. My name is Michael Simonson. I'm the Director of Public Outreach, and I'm in charge of the Reference Division. Today, we are going to talk about Gertrud Kolmar, a poet. She died tragically in the Shoah. She was originally from Berlin, and in her own life, she had some moderate success. So it's always interesting to think with people like this, what she maybe could have become or how much farther she could have gone. I'm going to introduce our guest, Friederike Heimann. And I wanted to say before introducing her, we're going to do things a little differently today. We're going to do some more actual reading of poems, parts of poems only, as they're generally quite long, and do a little bit closer analysis on some of them. So it'll be a little different than our usual program. However, following our usual program rules, and all throughout, you're welcome to use the chat to leave questions as they come up during the presentation, and we'll get to them afterwards. And people, once the conversation begins, are always welcome to raise their hand, and I can call on you as well. So Friederike Heimann, who we thank for being with us today, studied German political science and sociology at the FU Berlin. She received her doctorate in 2012 on the poet Gertrud Kolmar under Professor Alfred Bodenheimer at the Center for Jewish Studies in Basel, Switzerland. Dr. Heimann has numerous publications in the field of German Jewish literature, including works on Gertrud Kolmar, Walter Benjamin, Paul Celan, Rose Auslander, Jenny Aloni, and Herta Nathorf. All people we should actually think about reading in this group in the future. Most recently, a literary portrait of Kolmar was published by Suhrkamp, titled In the Chain of Fire of the Era, about Gertrud Kolmar. This just came out last year, so congratulations, Friederike. Since 2014, Dr. Heimann has been working at the Jewish Salon at Grindel in Hamburg. She's welcomed many different guests from literature and the sciences. She currently lives as a freelance author and literary scholar in Hamburg. That's where she's joining us from today. So Friederike, you're welcome to begin your presentation, and I will stand by and await reading orders, so to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for your kind introduction. I'm very happy to be able to talk about this wonderful Jewish German poet today, Gertrud Kolmar. I think she's worth it very much, and I'm happy to talk in the book club of New York City from the Leo Beck Institute about her. So welcome to everybody and good evening from here, because we have already 8 p.m. And please excuse my mistakes or my terrible German accent. I haven't been talking in an English-speaking surrounding for quite a while. I haven't been there for quite a while. So my English has gotten a little bit rusty, but I will do my very best. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask them any time. That will be fine with me. For the beginning, I have prepared a little PowerPoint presentation, and I will start with that now. Yeah, here you can see the structure. I thought I would give my talk, and I first want to talk about the biography of Gertrud Kolmar a little bit. Then I would say some words about why I think Gertrud Kolmar is still important for us today. Then I will turn to Welten, Words, which is the cycle of poems we want to focus on today, and in the context of the time when it was written, which was the year of 1937. And then we can read some poems by a little poetic journey through words, some quotations of several poems, and maybe we will do some close reading afterward. I made the proposal with Out of the Darkness, but if you wish, we can also choose another and a different poem from that. It doesn't have to be this one. This is a picture everyone knows who deals with Gertrud Kolmar. It's very famous, and you always almost see it when you get into contact with her. It's a very fascinating and impressive picture, and it really has a great impact, I think, with his big eyes, with this very special view in the eyes. It shows already her being a poet to me, and it shows her at the age of 34. And in fact, that was the time when she started her second creative period, and she wrote then all the big poetry cycles and prose we know from her today. It was her main creative period at all that started at that time. The sad side is that we always mostly see this photograph, that the only a small amount of photos survived the war, and we don't have many of her. And this, of course, is the most impressive one. So this for the beginning. Gertrud Kolmar was born on the 10th of December, 1894 in Berlin as the first child of the Chodzizners, an assimilated, well-situated Jewish family. And she was murdered in Auschwitz, probably on the 2nd of March 1943. Her father was Ludwig Chodzizner, a very successful and well-estimated criminal lawyer who felt very much integrated into the German society at his time. And here you see him in his 40s in Grunewald and on a horse, riding a horse, which was very usual in that time. Her mother, Elise, née Schönflies, was the sister of Walter Benjamin's mother, Pauline, and thus the famous German philosopher and the poetess were cousins and had a grandmother in common who played an essential role in the family. Here you see Walter Benjamin, also at the ages of 34, like Gertrud Kolmar before. And here's the grandmother who was very important for the family and played an essential role. And Walter Benjamin wrote a whole chapter about her in his very famous book, A Berlin Childhood, around 1900. And Gertrud Kolmar wrote a poem about her called Großmutter, which means grandmother in English. Gertrud had 3 younger siblings, 2 sisters and a brother, two sisters and a brother. At about the age of 20, she had an unhappy ending love affair with a young Prussian army officer, which led to an abortion followed by a severe personal crisis. The trauma of the loss of her child never left her and will recur as a theme of longing and mourning many times in her poetry. Being very gifted in languages, Gertrud studied English, French, and even Russian. Because of these abilities, she was employed as a letter censor in a prisoner of war camp during the First World War. After the war, she worked as a private teacher and governess, mainly in Berlin. In 1927, she went to Hamburg for about half a year and attended a 2-month language course afterward at the Dijon University in France. After her return to Germany in October of the same year, Gertrud took care of her mother, who was suffering from cancer and perished in March 1930. Around this time, Gertrud also started working as her father's secretary. She took responsibility for the entire household, now situated in Finkenkrug, near Falkensee, an idyllic rural place at the outskirts of Berlin. Here you see the house they were living then at that time. During winter time, it's a big and very nice house, and the whole family loved it a lot to be there, and there were many family gatherings, mainly at the weekends. And Gertrud took care for all that, And it was a big garden surrounding the house, and the fields and the woods were not far away, so you could start from there making beautiful walks through the landscape of Brandenburg near Berlin. And they had quite a lot of animals as well. They had dogs, they had cats, they had chicken, they had rabbits, and they had also ducks, I think. So she had quite a lot of work, quite a lot of work on her shoulders. And in her free time, she wrote her poetry. Most of her body, the body of most of her work was composed in this house. After the Nazis had come to power in January 1933, Gertrud, unlike her siblings, remained in Germany, mainly because she didn't want to leave her father alone, who too late had recognized how dangerous the situation had become. Here we see a last family picture. It is the last picture which shows the family together, and it was on the birthday of the father, Ludwig Rotzisner. I can show you maybe with this little dot who is who. Here is the father in the middle, sitting in the middle, and it was his birthday. And here's Gertrud Kolmar. Next to Gertrud Kolmar is her brother Georg. He went to England in 1939 and afterwards to Australia. Next to Gertrud is her youngest sister, Hilde Wenzel, with the little daughter, Sabine. Behind her is her husband, Peter Wenzel. And this is the next oldest sister to Gertrud, Margot. She also went to Australia and died there already in 1943. And this is the wife of Georg, Thea Rotzisner, who went to Chile. She couldn't follow his husband with her little son, Wolfgang. He was called Wolfgang by then, but later they called him Ben. And I met Ben as an old man in 2014 in Berlin, but a few years later he passed away, unfortunately. And Hilde was the first one who left only a few months after this picture was taken. She went to Switzerland with her little daughter and survived the war there. And between Hilde and Gertrud, they exchanged a lot of letters, and we have these letters from Gertrud's letters we still have today, and they are a very important source if you want to deal with her. And you find a lot of information about that time in the letters also. Due to the November pogrom in 1938, the Rotzisners were forced to sell the family home in Finkenkrug, their beloved living place for so many years, and moved to a so-called Judenwohnung in the center of Berlin. Like thousands of other Jews, Gertrud and her father were now trapped inside Germany. Their rights were systematically curtailed and their freedom of movement confined. In September 1942, her father was deported to Theresienstadt, where he died about 5 months later. On the 27th of February 1943, Gertrud herself was arrested in the weapon factory where she had been forced to work for 2 years and deported to Auschwitz on the 2nd of March transport. Gertrud's first publication, a small collection of poems, appeared in 1917 the first time under the name Gertrud Kolmar, which became her artist name from then on. And this is interesting also. At that time, she considered herself to be a completely German author, I think, because Kolmar is the name of the Polish town of Chodzisz, where the Rotzisners originally came from, as the name still tells you. And they Germanized this name, and she used it then as an artist's name in 1917 and continued to to use it as an artist name until the Nazis took it away from her again. And it was forbidden after the Nuremberg laws, it was forbidden for Jews to use a pseudonym, and she wasn't allowed to use it anymore then. But she's always known now again as Gertrud Kolmar. She continued to write poetry then until about 1920 and remained silent for about 7 years afterward. Only after her return from France in October 1927 did she find her way back to poetic writing. Over the next 13 years, she produced a significant body of work, including 10 cycles of poems, 3 dramas, and 3 prose narratives, of which the last one got lost during the war, added by a volume also of letters. During her lifetime, some of her poems appeared in various journals and anthologies, but due to the political situation, only 3 books of poetry had been published. Most of her work was published posthumously, including the cycle Welten, Words in English, which we will focus on today, and which was published shortly after the war already in 1947 by Suhrkamp, one of Germany's most famous publishing houses. Here you see the first edition of this collection. So why do I think Gertrud Kolmar is still important today? Meanwhile, Gertrud Kolmar is considered one of the greatest female German poets of the 20th century. No one else but Gertrud Kolmar stands for someone who has lived through all the catastrophes of her era during the first half of the 20th century until the bitter end, thus including the complete end of the era of German Jewish literature, which once began in the 19th century with Heinrich Heine enthusiastically and at the same time already then was full of ambiguity and contradiction. But unlike her much more famous contemporaries, Else Lasker-Schüler and Nelly Sachs, Gertrud Kolmar was pretty unknown until the very end of the last century. The both of them managed to escape from Nazi Germany and continued their writing in exile. In contrast, Kolmar was trapped in Germany and murdered in Auschwitz, which made it much more problematic to become engaged with her work and even more with her life. This changed around Kolmar's 100th birthday in the year 1994. There was an extensive exhibition about her life and work in the German National Archive of Literature in Marbach. More and more receptions of her work were being published, and with the publication of a 5-volume critical edition during the last 20 years, a solid and reliable text of Kolmar's entire work exists now. Since then, interest in Kolmar's writings has spread beyond the German-speaking world, and her work is now translated or about to be translated into English, French, Italian, Spanish, Russian, Hungarian, Polish, and even Ukrainian, and I think also some poems have been translated into Hebrew. Welten, Words, she wrote 1937. It's a cycle of 17 poems, and she wrote it from August, about the time when her father's birthday party took place, until December 1937. It was the last cycle of German poems she has ever written. In a letter from February 1939, she told her sister that it was her very best one and declared it as her favorite. It followed still some prose work in German, but no poetry. But from 1940 on, she seriously attempted to compose poetry in Hebrew, as we know from her letters, which she was about to learn at that time and could already speak quite well. So in a way, we can consider Kolmar's Words as her poetic farewell to the German culture and language, which she once thought to be part of and had identified with. Now, in 1937, after 4 years of experience with Nazi Germany, she had long since recognized this as something that belonged totally to the past, or even worse, that had turned out to be a terrible illusion. Within these 17 poems of words, one finds many indications of this development, as we will see by looking at some of them closer now. In general, Kolmar uses conventional forms and rhyme schemes in her poetry. But here it's different. The verses we read here in this cycle of poems consists of unusually long lines, all written in free rhythms without rhyme. And I think already this difference in the formal appearance shows that something fundamentally changed for the poetess. Before we start now reading some poetry, with Michael's help, I hope, I would like to show you an approach to poetry which I agree with very much, and which I took from the book Poetic Thinking Today, written by Amir Eshel. He's a literary scholar at Stanford. And I like this book very much. He wrote, and he wrote about poetry and how we should read poetry. I read the sentence to you I underlined here. As poesis, the poem bears the mark of all that led to its creation, from the poet's life and historical setting to all historical layers of the language being used. So maybe this is a good transfer to reading now the poetry itself. Thank you
Sure,
very much.
ready to do that. So